Throughout history, humanity has been obsessed with uncovering ancient relics and artifacts. For many architects, these items that hold legendary status are another way of physically bridging the gap between the past and the present. For the average person, though, the mysterious myths surrounding these items are the most intriguing thing about them, be they curses, promises of immortality, or the ability to heal oneself. The series SPRIGGAN by Hiroshi Takashige and Ryoji Minagawa brilliantly capitalizes on this common interest, but with a dash of shonen sensibilities and corporate espionage. SPRIGGAN might not really ring a ton of bells for some of you, because it really wasn't that much of a smash hit overseas. It's one of the many series that had a ton of talent on board with the likes of From Software, David Productions, and even Katsuhiro Otomo, but never went too mainstream. Despite that, there are so many qualities about SPRIGGAN that are incredibly creative and sadly go overlooked. So as one of 3 existing SPRIGGAN fans around,
there are dozens of us! Dozens!
I feel the need to go through the entire franchise and celebrate it, as well as maybe look at some of the reasons it didn't share as much success as many of its sci-fi brothers and sisters at that time. In Cornish folklore, there exists a creature known as a SPRIGGAN, which is a legendary creature that is said to protect ancient treasures. Hiroshi Takashige and Ryoji Minagawa cleverly update this legend by bringing it to modern day through the lens of science fiction. SPRIGGAN asks a bold question: what if governments and corporations were corrupt idiots who try to seize deadly weapons for their own personal gain in an arms race, in the form of ancient relics and such? SPRIGGAN's premise is its strongest feature without a doubt. It helps that each arc is backed up by Hiroshi Takashige's deep research into a variety of esoteric and occult material. He does include some of the more famous artifacts like the Philosopher's Stone, the Ark of Covenant, and even the Crystal Skull in an arc that features a political extremist group trying to get their hands on it. Wait, this sounds a little bit familiar. He also tosses in some more obscure things like the Philadelphia experiment and the Forest of Dandaka from the Legend of Ramayana. This makes each arc feel fresh, which is good because most of the arcs are formulaic with the same potential world-ending stakes on the line. It is mostly focused on action, but the story isn't anything to sneeze at. Most of the meat of the story comes from its commentary on human nature and our relationship to power. It's pretty obvious that it's strongly influenced by Akira. It shares many themes about how power can corrupt an individual. In most cases, the artifacts are quick to corrupt the minds of the people who obtain them. It ponders on the deep question of whether humankind can really handle that kind of power and our own fallible nature. The manga also takes place at the end of the Cold War, so it's a good analogy for the arms race that took place during that time period. The agents that prevent these tools from falling into the wrong hands are known as the SPRIGGAN. The main character, Yu Amane, is often paired with other SPRIGGANs like Jean Jacquemond. These two are the best examples of SPRIGGAN's writing. Yu Amane has basically known war his entire life, growing up as a child soldier and even eventually becoming a SPRIGGAN. It creates a pretty interesting dichotomy where he's essentially a tool of destruction beckoned by his corporation Arkham to seal away other tools of destruction. Jean, his partner in crime, can also be kind of an insufferable dick at times, but he has daddy issues. Plus he can turn into a werewolf, and a French one at that, so that's more than enough for me. Where its weakness stems from is with the villains and some of the other supporting cast members. Because SPRIGGAN focuses so much on the action, it can often result in some unbalanced and undercooked characters. The villains get the worst of it most of the time because they're pretty much just mustache twirlers with little depth in them, but occasionally you'll get ones like Sergeant Bowman who have more emotional impact. But most of the time, I don't feel like there's enough build-up for the villains. There were times I completely forgot I was reading a shonen series, but occasional moments popped up that were way too hard to ignore. A bit of fighting for my friends here, and a bit of winning through sheer willpower there. Thankfully, it's not too much of a common thing, but I think it actually works in Yu's case because he grew up with his parents dead and lived the life of a child soldier, so it makes sense that he would cherish those connections that much harder. Overall, there's not much to say about the Spriggan manga outside of it being a pretty solid sci-fi shonen manga. If you've read it, you know that there are storylines and characters that are quite controversial that also might have prevented it from getting a full animated adaptation. Fortunately, there are a couple more adaptations for Spriggan, and it was actually given a massive budgeted theatrical film in 1998. Its budget was never fully disclosed to the public, but I'm assuming it had to be enormous, largely thanks to the involvement of the one and only Katsuhiro Otomo. He acted as a mentor to the director Hirotsugu Kawasaki, and even brought on many Akira veterans to the studio, and it shows because this shit is so pretty that you would take it out on a date without caring who's giving you looks. This was probably most people's first introduction to Spriggan, and I'm no exception. I vaguely remember watching it on a snow day when I was in high school. I was completely lost about the story at the time, but I thought it was the coolest shit ever, and I'm glad to say that it still is. Out of all the arcs they chose to adapt for the movie, they went with the Noah's Ark arc. I think that out of all the manga arcs they could have chosen for this one makes the most sense. It's the arc with the best mix of drama and action, but the problem is the original arc is way too short to make a feature-length film. The beginning chunk of the movie isn't even present in the manga, so you do get a smidge of filler content, but it's done well enough to the point where it feels like it actually fits right in with the actual story. It also gave us one of the best action sequences in the Istanbul scenes. Another way the film attempts to pan out its runtime is through these long shots of the environment, which of course are gorgeous to look at, and it actually makes for a much more atmospheric retelling of the story arc. It also makes some strange decisions that completely change the story, the biggest one being Yu Amine's relationship with Fat Man, who is now his old mentor and not Instructor Bowman. This could have been a point that added more depth to Fat Man, but there's really not much time spent with the character for it to be anything worthy of note. It struggles with the same issue that the manga had with the villains that feel painfully underwritten. I do feel McDougal in the manga had such a missed opportunity because his descent to madness feels a bit forced. I would have liked to know why he became so resentful of humanity in the first place, outside of having an ego trip like a Discord mod. They could have used some of that extensive runtime to maybe cover McDougal's backstory. Maybe he was mistreated during his experiments and exposed to brutal parts of human nature. Since Otomo was working on this, I have to wonder if he didn't catch how much McDougal was inspired by Akira. If this is your only foray into Spriggan, you're not really getting the full package here, and I recommend checking out the manga for better written stories. Noah's Ark doesn't really paint the full picture of what the manga is really about. Looking back at the film, it's kinda strange and almost like a dream that it happened. Out of all the serials that got Katsuhiro Otomo on board and a big fancy budget treatment, Spriggan's a bit of an odd choice. That wasn't the only odd choice made by the series, as it was followed up with a PS1 game in 1999. Who developed it? From Software. Considering just how brilliant and open the concept of Spriggan is, it had so much potential for a game, and with From Software on board, it sounds like a dream. Walking into the game, I could have sworn that it was translated into English, but unfortunately this game was only released in Japan. It is still very much playable in English thanks to the menus being in English, and it's not really that hard to navigate. The best thing that I can say about this game is that the presentation is excellent. The models may look a little dated, but they don't really look too far off from something that you'd see in Metal Gear 1. That's not the only thing that seemed to take from Metal Gear. Take a look at this. My favorite thing out of the game is actually the soundtrack composed by Keiichiro Sagawa, Tsukawa Saito, and Yuji Kanda, all from Armored Core fame. They go way harder than necessary. I mean, they are really tearing it up on some of these tracks. All of this stuff sounds phenomenal on paper, but then it's time to actually play the game and it fucking blows. The game is a PS1 action platformer with all the staples of bad games from that genre. Stiff, unfun gameplay, and atrocious platforming sequences that would turn a normal human being into a shitty AVGN clone. All the mechanics are set up well, but the execution is undeniably flawed. You know how the Spriggan are supposed to be quick, efficient soldiers on the battlefield? Well, here you pretty much have to methodically line yourself up with each and every enemy, and either take them down by a gun or a knife. I feel like every move I make, I'm sifting around in molasses or something. Truthfully, I just avoided combat as much as possible, but there's also a handful of bosses, but that's what cheats are for. The game's collectibles are really cool as you can unlock different types of weapons in each mission, and even obtain the muscle suit at a certain point in the game. It kind of reminded me of EDF in some ways, especially considering most of the missions are very much bite-sized. Another cool thing is that there's an RPG component to this game where you can put points into specific attributes. It's not a super deep system, but there's a ton of replay value and content here. And after your first playthrough, you can unlock Yu Amine as a playable character. You don't play as him in this game, instead a self-insert Arkham soldier. I wonder if this is one of the first anime games to do this concept where you're just a rookie on the sidelines, because it's certainly become a trend over the years. The story in this game is seemingly original, but I doubt anybody would go through the trouble of making an English patch for this game. In conclusion, this game kinda breaks my heart because it's almost too ambitious for its console generation. It's such a weird mixed bag of awesome ideas and terrible execution. I guarantee if this game was polished a bit more and released on the PS2, this thing would have been amazing. Out of everything Spriggan related, this one bums me out the most because we're definitely not gonna get another Spriggan game, let alone one with From Software on the helm. Around 2019, it was announced that there would be yet another Spriggan anime handled by JoJo Boy's David Production. There was quite a bit of trouble when it came to the development of this version because it was originally slated to come out in 2021, but because of COVID, it was pushed back to 2022. Spriggan fans were really excited that we were finally going to see a faithful full adaptation of the manga, but then you only see their 6 episodes. And it uses CGI. Okay, let's get the proverbial elephant out of the room out of the way first. It does use CGI pretty heavily. Wait a minute, it's not actually that bad, and it relies on traditional animation when it can. For those of you who aren't familiar with animation, sometimes CGI can be used to be more visually consistent. This is really useful because a lot of characters in Spriggan are heavily detailed and use patterns that are very hard to keep track of. That's why some anime like JoJo ended up getting more dumbed down in their designs. I know that might seem like a cop-out considering the quality of animation we got in the feature film, but I'd rather see this than having to wait 10 years for it to come out, or potentially subject the poor animes to more slave labor. Now, sometimes it does look pretty shoddy. The most noticeable one for me was the Berserker, or really any heavily technological elements. What you get here is a pretty solid adaptation of the 6 arcs from Spriggan. I'm not really sure about some of the choices for the arcs they did though. I was hoping for some of the more character-driven arcs to show up, like the one that dealt with Jean's past, so it could show that Spriggan is better written than a lot of people think, but instead we get another adaptation of Noah's Ark, which I feel is a little unnecessary. I guess it's the one that most people are familiar with, but I'd much rather go back to watch the film because it's a lot prettier. The worst offender is the show ending on the arc where Yu's backstory is revealed in the fight with Bowman, and then it just ends, and ends up feeling very inconclusive. It's just so weird because it almost felt rushed. But from the sounds of it, the mess that COVID caused probably has something to do with it feeling this way. Personally, I think Spriggan is an incredibly underrated franchise with tons of fun, creative ideas that also come with a ton of flaws. It never lacked talent, but what it really was lacking was a perfect adaptation. I greatly enjoy the film, but I do think if we had just gotten a proper anime adaptation in the 90s or something like that, it would have gotten more recognition. Because in the year 2022, it might have been a little too late for the series. I always like to think what would happen if that occurred and Toonami ended up getting their hands on it. But for now, all us Spriggan fans can do is dream.